The saying goes, a parent should never have to bury their child. But for 8 families, this would turn out to be their reality. Because from 1969 to 1970, 8 children would turn up dead across the 3 counties of Guyana. For today's case, there are no photos that I can post to show you the victims or the killer, because at the time, it being such an old case, the journalists never really took out photos to post in newspapers. So just know that there are not going to be any photos in today's video. The murders occurred across the 3 counties of Guyana. And now, if you're not from Guyana, just know that we're divided into 3 different counties: Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice. On March 20th, 1969, 8-year-old Basmati was reported missing. The last time she was seen was on her way to school, and persons said that they saw her in the company of a tall, bearded man. Basmati was from Anna Katrina, West Coast, Demerara. It would be a couple days later that she would sadly be found. Her body would be discovered in a canal at Bushy Park in East Bank, Essequibo, and she would be found with her limbs tied behind her back. Now, a few days later, the tossed-up body of an Amerindian boy would be discovered in Turkine, and he would be identified as Achiku. But because these 2 deaths were so far apart, remember, one is in Essequibo and the other one is in Turkine, nobody made a link as to these being related in any way. Now, on August the 30th, 15-year-old David Backus would leave his home at around 6:45 to go and purchase some bicycle parts, and he would never be seen alive again. Because on September the 13th, his body would be discovered in a trench in Liliandal cane field. So even though at the time no newspapers reported these deaths or linked them, the public still knew, they still felt like something was wrong. So persons were very cautious when it came to letting their children out of their sight. The public started assuming that there was some child kidnapper or a gang of kidnappers going around taking children and murdering them. And then to add to all the chaos, a 19-year-old was arrested because he went to school, a school in the city, and he told parents that their children were being kidnapped and they were being murdered by some crazed man. So when the police actually did investigation, they found that this was just a rumor that somebody had paid him to spread. And because of this, he was jailed for 6 months. So at the time, because the public was, becoming frantic, the then police commissioner, Carl Austin, went and he told persons, listen, your children are protected. There's no kidnapper. There's nobody that's taking your children. Please be calm, relax, everything is fine. However, of course, persons are going to continue to worry, especially when children are involved. And this would lead to the arrest of 2 persons. One man was arrested because he allegedly told a schoolboy that he could get him a job on a ship and that he can also help him with his GCE examinations. Another man was arrested because he was seen trying to drag a schoolgirl into his vehicle and telling her that he needed the hairs of 12 straight-haired girls. He was arrested, and when he appeared before the court, he said that none of this was true and that her and her friends were trying to tease him. So at the time, remember, nobody is actually reporting on it because the press did not believe that there was somebody kidnapping children and murdering them. And one veteran journalist, Carl Blackman, actually decided to do a piece in the newspaper where he said that there's actually no big bad boogeyman and nobody is kidnapping straight-haired children, so everybody needs to relax. And for people to actually believe that this is true is just preposterous. And carrying his satire even further, he said that the kidnapper was a mix between, and let me read this properly, Dracula and slapstick comedians Brad Abbott and Lou Costello. I'm just going to put a photo of them so we can see what they look like. So what he's saying is that this kidnapper is not a real person, and people need to stop worrying and stop feeding into these rumors. But knowing what we know now, even though he did not take it seriously, we do know that there was somebody that was taking children and killing them, and so his words would come back to bite him, especially since as a journalist he made a big joke about it. So on October the 20th, another body of a young boy would be discovered. The partially decomposed body of 12-year-old Mohammed Faisal would be taken from the trench in Crabwood Creek Quarantine. Now when the body was discovered, it was headless, but his skull would be later found a few days later in the same drain. Now Mohammed, before his discovery, he was missing for 2 weeks, because it would be on October the 30th was when he left home to go to the market on his bicycle, and that would be the last time that his parents would see him alive. So now that 4 bodies of children have been found across the country, now the police are going to take it serious, because they're realizing that there must be somebody or a gang of people who are taking children. This can't just be a coincidence. So now that the police were beginning to take this case seriously, then the media decided that they're going to print it in the newspapers, and all the details of the deaths are placed in the newspapers. So now the public is even in more of an uproar, as in what is happening to our children. Who is taking our children? One news report suggested that the killings were opium murders, so somebody was doing spiritual work and they were making sacrifices with all of these children. This news print was the Guyana Graphic, and they ran with this story because allegedly the police discovered a black book in the Crabwood Creek where they had discovered Mohammed's body. Now just 7 days after Mohammed's body was found, on October the 27th, another body of a young boy was discovered. This would be the body of 14-year-old Jagdio Jagroup, and he would be found with his hands tied behind his back and his legs bound, and he was discovered in a trench in Mahika. On November the 3rd, while a group of students were heading to school sports on Thomas Lands, they came across something in the trench, and they didn't realize what it was at first, but as they continued to look, they realized that it was the half-naked body of a boy. This would be the 6th victim, the 6th child to be taken and killed. This boy would eventually be identified as Mohammed Nizam Ali, and just like Jagdio, he would be discovered with his hands bound and his feet bound. Now this Mohammed, the second one, he disappeared after he left home to go and view the posters at Middle Street Cinema. That cinema is no longer in existence, but he left home to go and view the posters to see what movies would be showing, and that would be the last time that his family would see him alive. So Police Commissioner Austin, who had earlier stated that there was actually no kidnapper and parents need to understand that their children are well protected, is now coming out to the public and stating that parents need to immediately inform the police, immediately report when their children go missing, because it seems like this kidnapper or these kidnappers are taking children who, well, boys specifically, who are loitering and straying. So if we take a moment and look at all of these children who were taken and killed, one thing we can notice that they have in common is that all of them were of East Indian descent. And so because this was their common feature, persons started to say that maybe it was a racially motivated killing, and so somebody from the opposite racial background may be the one who is responsible for the killings of these children. So at the time, this was even adding to more racial division in the country. It was only one of the children who was actually not East Indian, and that would be the Amerindian boy. So the public was reaching out to the police, they're reaching out to the Prime Minister at the time, asking for some kind of assistance. They need to know who is doing this, who is taking their children and killing them. And what they did discover from the little clues that they had was that this person was targeting boys, except Basmati. Whoever this person or persons was targeting East Indian children, except the one Amerindian child. And when they did the autopsies, they realized that this person was also a psychopath, because he was sexually assaulting his victims before killing them. What they also found was that these children were not killed prior to being tossed in the trenches. After being assaulted, he would tie them up and then proceed to throw them in the trenches. alive. So now that there are 6 victims found, the police decide, okay, it's time for us to put some pedal to the metal and try and solve this crime. And they decided to go back to the Thomas Land vicinity where they had discovered the 6th body and do some more investigation to find some clues. What they discovered first was a yachting boots with the tongue and laces missing, and when they continued to investigate, they found another boot and a pair of underwear. So acting on a tip that they received, they went and they questioned a resident of PT Railway Line, and that resident said that yeah, they know who this boot belonged to, and they identified the person as Harry Rambaran. So that was the first clue. Now the next clue came from the father of Jagdeo Jagru, who said that in July a man came by their home looking for a job. So on October the 16th, this man returned and he had identified himself as Anand, and he was given permission to stay with the family and to sleep in a lounge with the 2 sons, Jagdeo Jagru, along with his brother. Now the day that Jagdeo's body was discovered was the same day that this stranger left the home, and that was October the 27th. So now the police had put out information that they're in search of this man by the name of Anand, and they're also looking for another man by the name of Anand Ramlal. So these are two different persons they're looking for, an Anand and an Anand Ramlal. Now Anand Ramlal was a preacher who had escaped from prison, so he was on the run, and he was another person of interest who the police were looking for. But no matter how the police searched, both of these men would not be found, and the killer would go and strike 2 more times. So on December the 31st, another body would be discovered, and that would be the body of 10-year-old Harry Narain, who was also called Paulton. Harry Narain was discovered in a canal in Mahaika. At the time of his disappearance, Harry Knott was staying with an aunt in La Bagatelle, Laguan, but he was actually from Hog Island, Essequibo. So Harry Knott was reported missing because apparently some man went to the aunt and told her how the father had sent him to collect Harry Knott and take him back to Laguan. But we know that this was not true, and the next thing that happened was Harry Knott was discovered dead. Now it would be until another 6 months that the killer would strike again. Orlando Guthrie, a 7-year-old boy, was reported missing from his Grove home, East Bank, Demerara. But by the time that Orlando was reported missing, the police were already honing in on who their killer was. The person who was identified as Anand was now positively identified as Harry Knott Bihari, and he was a 30-year-old reader man and fisherman who was going from county to county looking for a job. Now he had many aliases, and I want to make sure I get them all right. He went by Harry Rambaran, Charles Bissoon, Charles Pereira, Anand Prasad, and Maka Anand. So these were all the names that persons knew him as. So Bihari was no stranger to crime, being imprisoned, none of that, because he was arrested before for simple larceny, and the last time he was convicted was because he had committed an act of gross indecency, and for that he spent 12 months in prison. Now the end of his conviction, those 12 months, coincides perfectly to when Basmati, the first and only female victim, was killed, because he was released from prison March the 10th and Basmati was reported missing on March the 20th. So that's only a difference of 10 days. So now the police had an idea of who this man was and how he selected his victims. Harry Knott would go from village to village pretending that he was looking for work, and he would specifically target homes that had children. He was described as being 5 feet 7 inches tall. He had a squint in one eye, and he always kept his hat in his face. He never looked anyone straight in the eye. He walked with a slight limp, and his yachting boots were always worn down at the heel. And even though now the police knew exactly who they were looking for, he still continued to evade them. It was a very observant resident who led to the arrest of Harry Knott Bihari. It was in June 1970 that a group of residents was at home when a diminutive man came by his residence. And this man was looking for a job. So he said, okay, you can cut my grass. But what the residents noticed was that if this person was a reader man, like a avid reader man, like this was their job to weed, then one thing that they would ensure is always working is their tool, a cutlass. But a resident noticed that this person's cutlass was dull and it didn't look like it was sharpened for a very long time. So the resident allowed the person to cut the grass. After the weeder man sharpened his cutlass, he began to cut the grass and then he left. And it was not until later that evening when he realized that, when he heard the news of the missing 7-year-old Orlando Guthrie, that he started to put 2 and 2 together, and he realized maybe this person has something to do with these missing children. Now a few days later, this resident was heading to Georgetown, and that's when he spotted this weeder man coming out from the dam in Houston, East Bank, Demerara. And I don't know what caused him to do this, but this person decided that he was going to follow this man. And so he saw him get into a taxi and he himself jumped into a car and followed him. Now he followed this man until he came off at Charleston Post Office, and it was then he saw a sergeant, like a police sergeant that he knew. So he went to this police sergeant and he told him his suspicions of this person, but this person didn't take him on and he just thought it was a joke, so he ignored him. But then just a short time after, he saw at the time a very young and new detective by the name of James Brown, who was driving a police jeep, and he flagged him down at Broad Street and he told him his suspicions of this man. So the James Bond allowed him to come into the vehicle and they continued to follow this weeder man. So at this time, because it was a little bit, they lost him, but they continued to drive around Charleston looking for this person, and their persistence paid off because they eventually spotted him in Charleston. So after spotting him, remember he was walking, so the detective James Brown decided, okay, I'm just gonna come out of the vehicle and walk behind him, you know, follow him a little inconspicuously. But eventually this weeder man saw him and started running for his life, but he didn't know that James Brown was an athlete. So James Brown was running right behind him and eventually caught up with him, took him down and took away the cutlass from him. So he was now under arrest, and while they were on the way walking, he was vividly, like, he was agitated, he was shaking. And when James Brown brought up the fact that he is being suspected of killing these children, he was shaking even more. And then when he saw that resident, the person who he worked for, oh my gosh, he started to shake even more. After he arrived at the police station, it was about 6 police officers that started questioning him. I'm not sure if all 6 of them were in the room one time, or if, you know, one after the other they went in to see what information they could get, but it was a total of 6 police officers that questioned this man. So as they continued to question him, he was beginning to break down a little bit, but then he asked for a cigarette. So they bought him a pack of cigarettes and he smoked. After smoking, he asked for some fried chicken. So they bought him some chicken and they bought him a small drink and he ate. And it was when he finished eating that he confessed what he did. And yes, I know a lot of persons might be sitting saying, maybe because he was pressured into answering, saying that he did this when he actually didn't do it, maybe the police were pressuring him. But after confessing, he took them directly to where he had dumped Orlando Guthrie. So if that's not confirmation, I don't know what else is. So remember, until they would have taken him to the body, everybody was just speculating. But after seeing this body of this 7-year-old boy, that's when they knew for sure that Harinath Bihari was the child killer. And it was at the back of Diamond Estate, East Bank, Demerara, in a trench. That's where he dumped the body of Orlando. So even though he took them to the body, they still need more information to verify that he is the one that did these killings, because somebody could have told him where this young man's body was. But then he also took the police to where he killed all of the children. So this was even more confirmation that he was the one who was ending the lives of these children. So Bihari would say that It was somebody that was causing him, that was forcing him to commit these murders. And it was somebody by the name of David, some mysterious figure. But there was no David that would ever surface. And so Bihari would be the one to be punished for these deaths. So finally, the person who was responsible for the death of these 8 children was arrested. But the public would not see justice. The families would not see justice, because it would be 7 months later, while in prison, that Bihari would be found hanging in his cell. This man who was terrorizing families, who was taking the lives of innocent children, would end his life by his own hands, because he was just so much of a coward that he could not face what he did. But there were some speculations that he didn't actually kill himself, that somebody in some staff of the police station actually did the killing and just made it look like a suicide. But that was just gaffe among adults for a long time. That cannot be verified. Before his death, Bihari was being charged for the murder of 8 children, 7 boys and 1 girl. But according to him, he had nothing to do with Basmati. He said he didn't kill her and he don't know who did, but it was not him. At the end of the day, there were 8 children who were mercilessly murdered. Their absence has left a hole in their families. Even though this is such an old case, I'm sure that their parents never forgot about them and continues to mourn for them. Basmati, Achiku, David Bacchus, Orlando Guthrie, Jagdio Jagrup, Mohammed Faisal, Mohammed Nizam Ali, and Hari Narain. They are gone, but they will never be forgotten.